Alright guys, so in this video we're going to talk about and look at the XHR, the XML HTTP request object. So this is an object that's built into the browser and allows us to make HTTP requests. It is a little more complicated than the Fetch API, but it's still pretty straightforward. And you may notice the XML is included in the name of the object. Also, AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now, this is because years ago when this technology was created, XML was the common data format that we used for HTTP and this type of communication. These days, you'll almost never see XML. Instead, we work with JSON, which is much simpler and cleaner. All right, so keep that in mind. We're not dealing with XML, even though it's in the name of these technologies. All right, so just to kind of show you how this works real quick before we get into it, when we go to a web page and we make a request and get a response, it looks like this, right? So our client or our browser makes a request, the server gives us a response. When we're dealing with AJAX or even the Fetch API, what happens is we make that request from our code behind the scenes, so we don't have to refresh. This right here is when we go to the page or refresh the page, but when we do it from our code, it happens behind the scenes and makes an HTTP request to the server, gives us a JSON or XML response, most likely JSON, and then we can take that response and we can update certain parts of the page. Like if we wanted to show a list of something that we got from a request to an API that was connected to a database, we could do that. All right. If we want to submit a form and have something happen behind the scenes, we can do that using either XHR or the Fetch API. All right, so let's jump into some code and see exactly how this works. So to start with, I just have an HTML file with a UL that has an ID of results. That's where I want to output the data that we fetch. And then I just have a very simple style sheet. You don't need this, but I just wanted to make it look a little better. And then I also have a movies.json because I want to show you how to fetch data from just a regular JSON file on our system, as well as fetching data from an API. So here I just have a JSON array of mob movies, some movies that I like: The Godfather, Goodfellas, A Bronx Tale, which has the title and then also the year. So I want to be able to fetch this data and bring it into our application. So in our script.js, which is completely empty, the first thing we're going to do is initialize an XML HTTP request object. So typically we'll call this XHR, but you can call it anything. And then we'll say new XML HTTP request. Okay, now the open method is what we want to call first. So let's say xhr.open. And then that's going to take in two things: the type of request, in this case a GET request. And then secondly, we want either the URL of the API we're fetching data from or the file. In this case, I'm going to do ./movies.json because it's a local file. Okay, and then we want to create an event handler for an event called onReadyStateChange. So let's say xhr.onReadyStateChange, and then we're going to run a function. Now, basically, there's 5 different states that the ready state property can be in. So I'm going to actually comment this in here. All right, so there's 5 possible values, and this is kind of the process that it goes through. So 0 means the request is not initialized. 1 means the server connection is established. 2, the request is received. 3, it's processing the request. And 4, the request is finished and the response is ready, which is obviously when you want to get the data, is when this is for. So let's just do a console log here. Now the way we can access the properties is with the this keyword. So we're going to say this and then ready state. So if I save that, actually this isn't going to do anything yet because we have to actually send the request with the send method. So let's say xhr.send, save that, and now in the console we see 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't show 0 because that means the request is not initialized, and then it doesn't show 1 either when it's established, but it shows us that the request is received, then it's processing the request, and then the request is finished. Now, we only want to do something when the request is finished, So we want to make sure that that is equal to 4. We also want to make sure that the response is successful. So to get the response or the status code, we can use this.status. If I save that, we run it, you'll see we get 200. So what you're going to want to do is just check to make sure, before we do anything, you want to check to make sure that this.readyState is equal to 4, and we want to make sure that this.status is equal to 200. Okay, so then we're ready to do whatever it is we want to do. In this case, I'm just going to, for now, console log the response text. Now, this is going to be a JSON string, so I'm going to actually wrap it in json.parse. Remember, that's to take a string. So if you have an array that is a JSON string and you want it to parse it as a regular array, you would pass it in here. And the way we get the data is with this.response.text. So I'm going to save that, and now in the console you'll see we have our data. So we have our 3 movies with the title and the year. So now I could do whatever I want with this data. All right, I'm going to just comment that out, and I'm going to put the data into a variable. So again, I'm going to do json.parse and say this.response text. So now we have the movies in that data, and it's an array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through using for each, and let's say for each movie, let's create a list item and output it. So we'll say const li equals document.createElement, and we're going to create a list item element, and then let's take that list item and let's say inner HTML, and I'm going to set that to some backticks, and we'll have a strong tag, and let's end the strong tag, and then within the strong tag I want to put the title. So we have access to movie because we loop through the data, and we're saying for each one we want to call that movie. Now that's going to give us an object, so I want to get the title of that object. Then we're going to put the year in, so we'll say movie.year. Now that we have our list item created, let's select the UL, so we'll say document.querySelector, and I think it's an ID of results. Is it result or results? Results. Okay, so now we want to then append child, and we want to pass in here the list item. Okay, so now I'll save that, and you'll see it's displaying the data on the page. So if I wanted to add another movie, like I could just add it to this file. So I don't know, let's say Casino. Not exactly sure which year that was made. It was like 94 or something like that, I think. So I'll save that, and that gets added. Now, to fetch data from an API is not much different. We're just going to go ahead and I'll copy this down and comment this out, and we'll make a GET request, but this time it's going to be to HTTPS, and let's say api.github.com/users/Brad Traversy. Now I'm going to get my repositories, and with this API you can do /repos. That will give you all your repos. And then down here, obviously we're not dealing with movies anymore, but this is all going to stay the same. We're just going to, instead of movie, let's say repo, right? Because that's the data we're getting from response text. And then down here, instead of movie title, let's say repo, and I believe it's name, so repo.name. And then we also have access to the description. So for this one, we'll say repo.description and add it to the DOM, and there we go. So it's getting all of my repositories. It has giving me the name and giving me the description for all of my repos, or I think it's the first 20. And there's different parameters you can use if you only want to fetch like 5 or if you want to fetch more than this and so on. So you have to be familiar with the API you're using. You have to know which endpoints are available, such as this here. You have to know what you're getting back. And just to show you, if I just want to make this a little bigger. If I go to my network tab and refresh this, and let me just make this a little bigger. So let's see, we want fetch XHR, and you'll see repos. Click on that and we see the exact response we're getting. So we have access to all this data. All right, now again, you need to know what is available because you need to know what you can use and what you can put in your application. And when you send data, if you have some kind of form and you're reaching out to an API, you need to know what you can send. You know, there's different rules, and all APIs have documentation. So if you just search for GitHub API docs, you'll get, you know, all the documentation for that API so that you can understand, you know, what's going on and what you need to do and what you need to put in your code. All right, but that's just a simple example of using Ajax. In the next video, we're going to do a tiny project, and it's going to be a Chuck Norris joke generator because there's actually an API where we can fetch Chuck Norris jokes. So we're going to get to that next.